there. Welcome to the Aquarium Online Academy brought to you by the Aquarium of the Pacific. I'm Stacy and we are going to be looking at ocean exploration today. So, what does that even mean? I want you to just take a moment and think about what does that mean? If you were going to be exploring the ocean, what are some of the tools that you would need to do that exploration and where would you go? Now, while you're thinking about that, I do want to share with you our text number, because if you have questions throughout our program here, or even if you're watching after the fact, if you're watching this recorded, you can even email those questions. So our text number is right down here. It's 562-286-1838. So that is our text line. You can text in any questions that you might have or any observations you want to share, or even any thoughts maybe that you want to share as well. And if you have any questions, again, after the fact, you can email us at live@lbaop.org. Again, that's live, L-I-V-E, at lbaop.org. So ocean exploration, what does that even mean? Now, ocean exploration, if you take it just at face value, we're talking about just looking at the ocean and looking at anything you can find. Now, I think a lot of us are really drawn to animals, right? And I think I'm definitely drawn to animals. And one of the things that I love seeing with exploration are those animals. But there's so much more to the ocean than just animals. There is the bottom of the ocean as well, the earth. Right? And so you can definitely take a look at that. There's also things that might be in the ocean that used to not be in the ocean that you can be looking at as well. So we're going to kind of peek into all those different things. But how do you even explore? Now, one of the things you can do that even you could do if you could get to the ocean is to explore just by looking at it. You can walk along the beach, you can take a look at the sand, take a look out into the water. If there's anything that has washed up on the beach, like maybe some seaweed or even some jellies, don't touch those jellies because you don't know if they might sting. But you can look at them and learn a lot just by observing. What are some of the things that you notice about those things that you see at the beach? Now, if you would like to even get into the water, you can go swimming and maybe snorkeling. And for snorkeling, all you need is just a mask so you can see under the water really easily. And also a snorkel, which is that tube that helps you breathe when you're floating in the water. With your face in the water, the tube is out of water. So you can actually look in that water and you can breathe and you can see a whole lot of things rather than having to hold your breath every time you go under the surface. And then, of course, if you get certified, you might even be able to scuba dive. Now, scuba diving has all kinds of equipment that you would have on you in order to almost be like a fish and get into the water to really check things out. Now, we also have an episode called The Science of Diving. If you are interested in diving, I highly recommend that you check that one out. It will help you learn a lot more about what it takes to be a scuba diver, to explore in that way. Now, what if you don't want to get wet? Well, there are other things as well. Now, these things tend to be a little bit more expensive and a little bit less attainable to just every person out there, but something like a submarine. So there are many, many different styles of submarines out there, but a submarine is basically a vehicle that a person can go into that actually can go into the water. So these submarines are pretty interesting. Now, this is a newer model-ish, and it is owned by NOAA. NOAA is the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Now, if you haven't heard of that before, I bet you've probably heard of NASA, right? NASA, those are the folks that check out the sky and up out of our planet, right? They look at space. Well, NOAA is just like NASA, but of our planet. So they're really looking at our atmosphere and our oceans and investigating and studying that. NOAA does a lot of ocean exploration. In fact, they even have a ship that is dedicated to it called the Okeanos. And the Okeanos is an exploration vessel. This ship is designed just for exploration. Now, sometimes that ship has things like a submarine on it. Now, in a submarine, the human has to be inside piloting. Now, think about that for a minute. If you were to go into the ocean and drive around in that submarine, well, what about going to the bathroom? What about getting food? What about all of those different things? So you need to have a support vessel, just like our Okeanos here. And that support vessel is actually where you would be living. So whenever you go and explore in a vessel like that little submarine there, you would go out of the back of it here, right there. That's where everything is deployed from. And then you can go into the water and probably spend several hours under the water. And then you go back up, get back on the ship here, and that's where you would sleep and eat and just kind of live your daily life and also document everything that you may have seen down there, because documenting things is incredibly important, especially when you're exploring places that you haven't seen before, or maybe it hasn't been seen in a really long time. So you want to look at the changes of that space. So that's why a ship like this is so important. Now, these ships also hold things called ROVs. An ROV is probably one of the coolest ways to explore. ROV is a remotely operated vehicle. If any of you have ever driven like a remote control car before, it's a lot like that, except that it is tethered by a wire. Okay, actually a lot of wire. And this here is an example of an ROV. Now, this ROV is owned by the Schmidt Ocean Institute, and the Schmidt Ocean Institute also has a research vessel, an exploration vessel called the Falcor. And this ROV's name is Sebastian. It's kind of one of my favorite names, I think. So the Sebastian vehicle here can actually go down into the water just like this. Now, you can see it is tethered. So this line here is connecting this ROV to the ship that is up above. Now, these things, because it is remotely operated, that means there is a person in a control room that's controlling the whole thing. This can actually be in the water for hours and hours on end. You don't have to worry about a person being in there needing food, needing a bathroom, needing rest, because all of that happens on the ship. In fact, here in this control room, you can have a pilot, so somebody who is driving that ROV. And if their time is up, they have worked their time span and they're getting a little bit tired, they tag out. They just tag in a new pilot. So you can actually rotate the staff that are coming through and actually driving that ROV. So this is the control room again of the Falcor, and the control room has all of those screens. All of those screens are useful because on that ROV, on that big box, that's about the size of, say, like a small car, there are lots and lots of different things there. There are some things that, some cameras and video cameras and things, so that way you can see everything around, and it can be recorded as well. There are lights, because sometimes, especially ROVs, are used to explore really, really deep parts of our ocean where no sunlight can reach. In fact, in the brightest time of day, it is completely dark down there. That's how deep it is in the ocean. So that ROV needs to be outfitted with lights. And then there's a lot of instruments that might check things like temperature, pH, pressure, lots and lots of different things like that. And then there's even more things that are added to it to help you investigate kind of what the atmosphere is like. Now, this is one of those pieces of equipment that can be attached to the ROV. This here is, I believe, let's see, I think this is actually something that is used to collect animals. So if they were to collect things like animals, they can put them in these different containers. They can actually, as you can see, label where they found something and the number, so that way you can document everything. You know exactly where that thing was found, and then it will be brought up on that ROV. So it's a really neat thing that is attached to that ROV. Now, another thing that's attached to the ROV, because if you are collecting something, you need to be able to collect it with something, right? So this here is a mechanical arm. And this mechanical arm of the Sebastian, as you can see right down here, actually, there we go. Thanks, Talia. This has a little grippy hand. And that little grippy hand is perfect for being able to grab onto something. So you can see that there were lots and lots of joints in the arm to give it just the right position. And this hand here can actually rotate. So that way, it's not like you can just go this way, but you go this way and then it can rotate in case you want to grab it this way. Okay, so that's it's a really important part of being able to explore, because if you want to do collections, and not just animals too, maybe you want to collect a different kind of rock to see what kind of earth is in the area you're exploring. This is what it can be used for. Now, it's interesting because how do you control something like this? You can't really feel anything, right? So don't you think if you maybe grabbed a rock, it could crush it? And that's true, it could, but this very special remote control here is what's used to control that arm. So again, we're still looking at the Schmidt Ocean Institute's equipment here, and this is the remote control that is used for that arm. Every joint that you see in this remote control is the same joint on that arm. And this right here is what controls the hand and grabbing the hand. Now, some of these controls even have feedback. What that means is your fingertips give you feedback. When you grab onto something, you feel the thing. You can feel how hard you're squeezing, so you know just how hard you need to squeeze if you're going to pick up a grape to feed yourself, right? Because if you squeeze too hard, that grape's just going to get everywhere and you can't really eat it as easily. Well, it's the same thing with this. This gives you feedback. You actually know how hard that little clamp is gripping so that you don't accidentally break whatever it is you're trying to collect. It's crazy technology, but this technology is what's helping all of these different explorations happen. So again, this is that that remote control that kind of controls that arm. Now, here's another really cool thing about these arms. There are usually two of them, one on each side of the ROV. And typically, it is two different people controlling those two arms. So one person per arm, because it takes a lot of thought and control. But what if you need to collect something and you need to use both of those arms together to grab something to collect? Well, you need some teamwork. In fact, these teams work pretty closely together because not only do those two arms, so the one right here and the one way over there, not only do they need to work in synchrony with each other, but the person who's driving the ROV is a whole nother human. And you need them to be in just the right spot and to stay still and all of those different things in order to make everything work. So all of the people who work on these things are working together as a team. Now, these people are also not necessarily biologists, right? They're not the ones who are like, oh, I know everything there is to know about this animal, because that's virtually impossible, especially when you're exploring places you've never gone to before and you're discovering new things. So a lot of times the people who are actually driving these ROVs are not your biologists, but they're more like engineers, like pilots even. And then all of these collections can then go to the biologists. If they're collecting rocks, they can go to the geologists. So there's lots of different science that can actually be done, can be studied because of the different kinds of exploration that we have out there in the ocean. Now, again, we're not just looking at these animals, right? We want to sometimes look at the earth. Sometimes that means taking a core sample, which is a special like tube, and you can stick it down into something like, say, the mud and get a sample of what the earth looks like. You know, we actually do that on land too. We take ice core samples to look at really thick ice in glaciers. You can even do that in a wetland to look at the different levels of mud in a wetland. So of course you can actually do that underwater as well, to take a look at what is this made of? What are the different layers there? Is it all the same? Or is it different material? It's pretty interesting. Now, let's see. Anderson is asking, how many different kinds of animals live in the Twilight Zone? Oh man, Anderson, that is a really tough question. We don't have a number, actually. It is mostly unexplored. So there's so much more to discover. That's one of the reasons why exploration is so important. You know, we haven't really looked at much of the ocean yet. It's only a very small percentage. I think it's somewhere... if you're talking about all of the ocean, like not just the bottom of the ocean and the surface of the ocean, but even all that space in between, it's probably, I think it's like less than 10% of the ocean's been explored. So less than 10% of the ocean has been seen. There's so much that could be out there. So I think that's really interesting. However, some animals that have been discovered in the twilight zone include things like angel sharks, lanternfish, a lot of bioluminescent animals like flashlight fish. Those types of things live in a place like the twilight zone. I believe this here is a bioluminescent worm of some sort. And this worm, you can see it's pretty dark in the background there. This is probably an animal that you might find in the twilight zone. So if you're unfamiliar with the twilight zone, we know that that's like a show, right? But what it actually is a space in the ocean that gets a little bit of light from the sun, just a little bit. It almost looks like twilight on land, right? So twilight is the time where the sun is going down and it's getting kind of dark, but you have a little bit of light. That's basically what the twilight zone is. So you do get a little bit of light there, but it's still so dim, it would be very difficult for us to see without lights. So a lot of the animals that live in the twilight zone and below are animals that actually use bioluminescence. Bioluminescence is biological light. Those animals are making their light. We can't do that. We make light by making things like flashlights and lanterns and things like that. Those animals actually have within their body a protein and an enzyme, so kind of different chemicals in their body that mix together and create light. Now, for us, if you were to get close to, say, like a light bulb, for example, you wouldn't want to touch that light bulb if it's been on for a long time because it's very warm. So when we make light, and if you think about the sun too, it's the same thing. The sun's light, that's hot. It's warm light. Bioluminescence is cool light. So when they make these lights, they're actually not making heat at all. It doesn't heat up anything. So that's why it's called a cool light. Now, most of the time, this bioluminescence is kind of a green or a blue color. Blue is a very common color for bioluminescence. But it's kind of amazing that these animals are actually making that light on their own. And why would they even need that? Do you think it could be used as a flashlight? Well, maybe. So for some animals, it might be able to light up enough space that they could see just in front of them, maybe to capture food or something like that. But that's not the only reason why they use light. They also use light to scare away things. Because if you were a little shrimpy like this friend here, this pandalid shrimp, something might try to eat you. But if you spit out a giant cloud of glowy stuff in the dark, that's kind of scary. If I was going for this shrimp, I might go, whoa, what is that? And actually back off. And that would give that shrimp enough time to get away. So this shrimp here is actually using bioluminescence to protect itself as a defensive mechanism. So it creates this it spits out a giant cloud of bioluminescent light, which is kind of wild. Other animals will use it to communicate with each other as well, or maybe even to help find a mate. So bioluminescence can be used for lots and lots of different reasons, but it is a very common thing to find in the deep sea, especially in places like the twilight zone. Okay, so let's get back to exploring. So not only are we exploring the animals like this, but we're also exploring the Earth itself, right? So part of what we are doing when we explore the Earth is we're actually looking for details, like all of these different bumps and ridges and canyons. Did you know that the bottom of the ocean is not just flat? It actually has all the same types of topography, or things like mountains and canyons and that sort of thing that we have on land, that's actually in the ocean as well. So it's pretty amazing what's down there. And like we as humans have actually been able to map the ocean floor, and most of that mapping has been done by things like satellites. Now, satellites are out in space and they're mapping the ocean floor. It's kind of crazy, right? And this is something that you might see if you were to look at the topography or the bathymetry of the ocean floor. But this is mostly found by things up in space, and that's kind of crazy. Just think of how much area is between something like a satellite and that ocean floor. So it's detecting very minute differences in the height of the water, of the ocean water in a certain space, and how that water moves. There's all these different crazy calculations that can help us see where there are mountains, where there are deep canyons like this over here. But if you were to actually go in a ship and drive that ship over the space and do something that's very, very similar to echolocation, like what bats do, you can get a much more detailed picture of what this kind of looks like. So there is this thing called multi-beam sonar. So when the ship drives over the ocean, it sends out sound, and that sound goes down into the water, and when it hits the bottom of the ocean, it bounces back up to the ship. And the amount of time it takes for that sound to bounce and come back tells you how deep that space is. Now, this is really cool. They actually take all of those data and they can create an image so we can see what the bottom looks like. It might be something like this. So the deeper parts of the ocean are things that are blue or even purple. And as it gets more shallow, you're getting closer to teal and green, even yellow, and some of it's even red. Red is almost like kind of much closer to the surface here. So without even having to dive into the water to check out what this looks like, the ship actually just drives over it, sends out those different beams of sound, and they can get a map of what the ocean floor looks like. Now, I think the most recent document was, I think there's something like 10 to 20% of the ocean floor has been mapped. That's it. And this mapping has been going on for years and years and years. So there is still so much to really go out there and look for when you're talking about ocean exploration. So if this is something that interests you, there are positions out there, but they're kind of few and far between because it costs a lot of money, right? And finding funding to do these kinds of explorations can be kind of tough. All right, so animals are a thing you can look for. Just what the bottom of the ocean looks like is something that you might look for. Something else is looking for remnants of human activity. So when you're exploring, you're really just going out there and looking for anything you can find. What's amazing is sometimes these explorers come across things like sunken ships, like airplanes, like ruins of a city. So this here is actually a ship that sunk. You can see kind of a while ago because there's so many different things that are attached to it. So when something like this is found, it's often marked on a map so that way you know where you can go to find it again. And they'll actually use that ROV to really drive around and try to see what's there. They often will go around and try to find out why did that ship sink in the first place. Is there a big hole in the hull that sunk it? Is there anything left on board that can tell us a little bit more about it? Sometimes they even look for the name, so you can actually see the name of the ship. This one here is a ship. It's actually a Japanese ship. So you can see here that the name of the ship here is in Japanese, so you know where it came from, which is kind of a neat thing. And then a lot of times they'll go and see if they can collect any items. We actually were really lucky that we got to connect with another exploration vessel called the Nautilus. And the Nautilus was out there, they found a shipwreck, and that ROV picked up a pair of very old pants. So yes, there were pants that were hanging out, and they worked together. Those two remote arms worked together to pick up a pair of pants. Now just think, if that one person slipped, they would have ripped those pants in half. So it's incredible what the staff do, what those experts are doing when they are collecting items like pants. They even collected things like jars and bottles that were sealed. So they're bringing them up to the surface to open them up and see what's inside. Maybe it's some old food. Hopefully it's not super gross, rotten food. But there was, a jar of ginger that was found in that same ship. So it kind of helps. I think it was used medicinally. So there's so much to explore and to see out there. Now, I think one of the coolest things is just that there's a lot that we've never seen before. and we're still discovering new things every day. So when these exploration vessels go out into the water and they're looking for stuff, they're literally looking for anything. And they can come across so many different things. In fact, lots of different animals are found every time they explore, because it's areas that they haven't seen or haven't seen in so long that new stuff pops up. So let's take a look at some of those deep sea critters that you might actually find in the ocean. So this is a little bobtail squid. This little squiddy here is kind of cute. Look at those little eyeballs. I love them. They are not from the deepest parts of the ocean, but they are often found where it is quite dark. And now this bobtail squid is one of the things that was discovered about it is that it does use bioluminescence. Do you see where it might glow from? Well, it's hard to tell, right? Because we're seeing it lit up by a light here. But it uses bioluminescence around its mouth. So right here is that's where all of their arms are, and in between all of the arms is its mouth. Now, if it was to open up those arms, the mouth actually has a ring of bioluminescence to attract things towards it. So it's like, look at the light, might be food for you. And then when the little things come nearby, it eats the little things. So instead of food for you, it becomes food for it. All right, so it's kind of crazy how these animals survive. And this is all, we know all of these things because of the exploration and the research that different people are doing. All right, let's look at another elusive animal. In fact, I believe this is actually the first video ever recorded of this animal. So I'm going to leave it to you to try to figure out what it is. All right, we'll bring it up in just a moment. All right, now you see that little arm there and the luminescence, the light that we are using. It is attracting an animal. Yes, that is a giant squid. And the giant squid was really checking out what that was all about, because that light may have been something that it would want to eat. So that light is actually attracting the giant squid. The giant squid reached out, it touched the light and was like, ooh, no, I don't want that. It's not food. And then it took off. So thank you, Noah, for getting that footage. It's really incredible to see. We knew that giant squid existed because giant squid have often been only found when they wash up on shore and they were dead. So we knew they existed. They are enormous animals, the biggest squid out there. They're quite hefty. And so we knew they existed, but to find them in the deep sea is really, really tough. So it was amazing that that Noah was actually able to attract a giant squid out there and get that video of it. I think there's been some photos that have been taken over time, but never any video. So very cool thing that we were able to share with you. And I'm so glad that we did. And thank you, Noah, for providing that research. It's pretty neat. So there's, again, so many different critters down there that are still out there to discover. If you are interested in learning more about ocean exploration, I encourage you to check out some of the different exploration vessels out there. So again, there is NOAA, N-O-A-A. NOAA has the Okeanos. And if you want to know how to spell any of these things, text us and we will send you the spelling of all of these different places, so that way we can get them to you and they're spelled correctly, because I don't want to misspell anything and make it real difficult for you to find. So text us and we'll bring that number up again just so that way you have it again. So again, the NOAA has the Okeanos, that's their research vessel. We have the Schmidt Ocean Institute with their Falcor, that's their exploration vessel. And then we've also been in contact with the Nautilus, and the Nautilus is owned by Bob Ballard, who is basically the guy who found the Titanic. So nice job doing that. And so Bob Ballard has the Nautilus, and the Nautilus goes out and does a lot of research on its own as well. So these are 3 different organizations that we have been in contact to learn so much more about ocean exploration. And I encourage you to find out more because there is so much to see. And each of those different places also has a lot of really cool photos and videos that are accessible to you just by looking them up online, so you can see more of the neat things that they find. I do want to say thank you so much for joining us for this program today. We are all done for our day today, but we do have more programs next week. All right. Thanks again for joining us. Have a nice weekend.